Ministers of the church are the Reverend Dr. Howard C. Scarf, the Reverend Dr. James R. Spear, and the Reverend J. Wayne Hanratty. Organist and choir director is Russell G. Wickman. Today's sermon by Dr. Scarf is titled Happy New Year. Anthems by the Shadyside Choir include Ring Out Wild Bells and Love Came Down at Christmas. Hymns to be sung, number 136, The Brightest and Best, Hope Speaks, and number 135, As With Gladness, Men of Old.
Last week, so many people have wished us a happy new year, haven't they? And we have been returning the greeting. It is a wonderful wish to give to any person, and there are so many who are intent on making the most of it that they are not up for church this morning. Of course, they couldn't be from this church, even though someone, in seeing the large crowd that was coming out for a New Year's Sunday morning, looked out the window of the church this morning and suspected that some of you were dropping into church on the way home from the party. There have been some in this nation who have celebrated more sumptuously than wisely, and they may be suffering from a headache this day. There are those, you see, that are always getting their labels mixed when it comes to a consideration of what this matter of happiness really means. A friend of mine tells me of his daughter's reaction on her first visit to a nightclub. She said, "I was not too disturbed by the off-color stories, the heavy drinking, the scantily clad dancers. What really bothered me was the large number of apparently very unhappy middle-aged people running after a good time and failing miserably. I'm sure her point was well taken. There are those who seek feverishly a good time. There are those who seek feverishly how to be happy. And yet when they say Happy New Year, they haven't the faintest idea what's really involved in such a wish. Now surely it was the will of Jesus that there should be joy here on earth. The Sermon on the Mount begins with the word blessed. The dictionary says that blessed means spiritually happy. Spiritually happy are they that seek after righteousness. Spiritually happy are the pure in heart. Spiritually happy are the merciful. The New Testament, as one reads through it, is a book that is filled with good news. It's a book that's constantly talking about something joyous that came to this world, and because of the visitation of that joyous thing, life in itself is supposed to be a happy thing, regardless of circumstances. You can follow through for the Christian program of Jesus Christ, and you can almost write his biography on the joy that followed the places where he had been. Where he passed, sorrows were healed. Shadows were lifted from strained minds. People went on their way with a certain triumph to their stride, and with a richer understanding of the things that were happening to them. In that 15th chapter of John, Christ had been talking about the mutual love that was between himself and his disciples. These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and your joy might be full. Happy New Year. Now there are many conditions that must be fulfilled if one is to have the faintest inkling of what Christ was talking about. For one thing, it's something that we mustn't start out this new year seeking by itself. I understand that Castro is very much disturbed by the fact that people are not smiling enough in Cuba. The result is that he has given an order for the youth of Cuba to organize happiness and to be a part of it. In other words, be happy or else. It doesn't come that way. It's something that comes over your shoulder. It's something that comes when you least expect it. And it's something that comes when you're not aiming at it. It comes not when we're looking for it, but when we're looking for something deeper out of which it may come. A young couple with a deep love for each other, they don't have to worry about it. The mother who gives herself to her children, she doesn't have to worry about it. The businessman who has tried to conduct his business according to the motto, he profits most who serves the best, he doesn't have to worry about it. It becomes a byproduct of something else he's doing. And it is a sad fact that in this world, too frequently, we pity the wrong people. A lot of folks we feel sorry for could give us some very valuable points about happiness. I think of the first mission field that I served in Saskatchewan in Canada. I was asked out to dinner one evening He was a very poor man. They had 5 children. They lived in 2 rooms. He was the garbage collector for the village. And they had a big dinner that night. This was the dinner because the preacher was coming. It didn't often happen. Little did he know that he was serving what to me was a great delicacy because I love sardines. But this was the main meat course. We had sardines, green beans, half a potato, and for dessert, a small dish of applesauce. But I've never been in a happier home. When one had been there for a little while, he found himself asking, what's the secret of this thing? Why, people in this world, they're working their hearts out, trying to make enough that they can buy things to enjoy life. And look what this man had. It was a house by the side of the road that was filled with joy. We often feel sorry in this world for the wrong people. How do we find this peace that Christ talked about? Well, for one thing, we have to understand that it's something that must come out of our jobs. It must come out of our environment. A man by the name of Alec Hepburn spent years looking for gold in northern Ontario. And finally, he went broke. And so he went as a day laborer with another mine in Canada where they were digging asbestos. And finally, he turned to a man who was using his pick beside him. And he said, when do we begin to hit the stuff? The answer was, you've been digging asbestos all day. And Hepburn very nearly went into a state of shock because he had had that stuff in his mind, and had worked it for years and didn't know there was any value to it. He went broke, standing in the midst of millions. Often we just don't appreciate what is close at hand. We don't appreciate that there may be something that is right within our homes, right within the place where we work, that's more important than everything that's outside. And yet we're in danger of separating our work from our pleasure. We're in danger of thinking of work as something that takes place between 8 and 5, or 8 and 6, or 9 and 4, or whatever the hours are. And after we get home, the pleasure will begin. Life just doesn't work that way. Certainly Aristotle never considered it to. He had a good deal to say about happiness. And he claimed that man is cut out not so much for it as he is for work. And Aristotle said the only way that a person can truly be happy in this world is to add a certain dedication and a certain greater measure of devotion to the job that he's doing day by day. And if he hasn't got this, he'll never have happiness. Many who are not getting pleasure out of their work would probably get a great deal more if they would just add some devotion. Don't you think that God intended the hours of the day and of the night to be filled with joy? Why do you think he so made a world that when you go over any hill or you go through any valley, you come up against some new wonder of nature? Happiness is not a blessing that is reserved only for those who can pay for their entertainment. Certainly the joy of Jesus was full, and yet how he worked. But he worked in the knowledge that every day was something new from God. Even if only a challenge, even if only a responsibility, but this was something from God. And out of this might find the joy that would fill one's heart. So he saw little Zacchaeus sitting up in the tree, and he told him to come down out of there because he wanted to have a talk with him. And I imagine that he found out enough from Zacchaeus to keep him thinking for the rest of the day. He walked along the road and he saw a blind beggar. No one else was noticing him excepting to push him out of the way. But Christ stopped and he spoke to him and he helped him. And I imagine he went on his way pondering on how he could make the kingdom of God meaningful to that kind of man. One thing we may be sure of, Jesus never thought of happiness as something that comes after the working hour. His joy was full because he was dedicated to the job that he was sure God wanted him to do. And he was alert to the rich values. He lived life on the higher plane. Said that a tourist walked into a room in an art gallery in Amsterdam where there were two masterpieces of Rembrandt, one of them The Night Watch. And he sauntered up to a man who was admiring him and he said, "Is there anything worth seeing here?" The man pointed out the significance of the two canvases. And the tourist gave another fleeting glance at them and he said, "How is the food at your hotel? It's terrible variety." In the midst of masterpieces like that, in the midst of beauty like that, and he was still living on the plane of eating and sleeping. Apparently his taste had never gotten bubbly. No one, you see, can enjoy vital happiness in living unless he lifts it to the highest plane that God has to offer. And a good deal of the popular modern psychology, I'm sure, is wrong. It speaks of happiness as coming from being adjusted to life, of being in harmony with one's environment. The truth is that the true joy of living comes from not settling smugly into one's surroundings, but in developing the stuff within us that will enable us, if need be, to rise above that environment. And this is what makes the man. Look back over your history. That history's great. Oh, I'm not thinking of those that have the reputation of being great. The Alexanders, the Napoleons. I'm thinking of the Milton. I'm thinking of the Beethoven. I'm thinking of these people who became great within their soul, and as you enumerate them one by one, you find that one after the other, someplace in his life had to go through hell. And that person achieved what he did. not by adjusting to environment, not by settling smugly in. He did it by the struggle of prayer and dedication and devotion and will. So he was able to say with Paul, I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. One can't have that kind of thing if he's just on the sleeping and the eating plane of life. For sooner or later he's going to be hit, and he's going to be hit hard. And as soon as this happens, his world will not only be shaken, but it will be shattered. Interesting that photographers don't get the best results taking pictures of people who are looking in mirrors. The most revealing are those that are taken from the unstudied expression, when the subject's mind is diverted to something outside himself. When he's looking in the mirror, he just can't think about anything excepting the personalities that he is seeing, which happens to be himself. There's too many of that timber. And there are too many people in this life who expect to be made happy. It seems to be one of the dangerous trends of our time. They want to be made happy by the state. They want to be made happy by the government. They want to be made happy by a social system. They want to be made happy by their husband or wife, or by their friends or neighbors. And they go about complaining and whining because those people are not making them as happy as they think they've a right to be. This thing comes only to people who are looking for it outside themselves. Not looking for it directly, but as a byproduct for something else for which they search. If life for us is a drab affair, the New Testament says, Happy New Year. And it says, find it by moving on to a higher plane of life. Dr. Bowie at Union Seminary was a master of illustration. He used to tell about a boy who was half blind and didn't know it. It was a time when people assumed that children's eyes were as they should be. But years later, when he was well along in school, it occurred to someone to have his eyes examined, and glasses were prescribed for his nearsightedness, and a new world came into view. He'd always loved trees, but he supposed that the trees that he saw were the same trees that everybody else saw. A tree was a green blur with a vaguely pleasant shade beneath it. Now, for the first time, he saw that a tree was not a blur. He saw a delicate beauty of leaves and of branches. He saw specific things in the tree, the glint of the sun and the shadow, which followed every passing of the breeze. It had never occurred to him, you see, that there was anything other than a foggy window through which to look at life. How true it is of living. A young couple can live life just thinking that each or the other, taking each other for granted, and they think that that's all there is to married life. If they could only look through the glasses of appreciation, they would move on to a new plane altogether. A man may say there is nothing to religion but discipline. He has never allowed his soul to grow. If he would only open his eyes and look intently at God's world and what God has done for others, he would see a source of power that would introduce him to a completely new world. Surely God intended that life should be lived on the higher plane. Surely God intended people to be spiritually blessed. Surely God intended it to be a growing thing. Just as Holmes once said, I always thought when I got to be 80 years, I could wrap up my life in a nice little knot with a ribbon around it and put it away in a drawer and go on doing things I wanted to do. But I learned when you have taken one trench, even after 80, there is always a new firing line beyond. Well, that's how the fullness of joy comes. We mount from one plane to the other as we move towards the end of life. The sunset is more appealing than we ever dreamed it could be. Joy becoming full. So happiness is the result of so many things, isn't it? In addition to these we've mentioned, surely it's the result of gratitude. The happy person is the thankful person. He has not forgotten to say thanks, because when he does, this erects a barrier between himself and the fullness of the joy he ought to have. Surely, too, happiness is a matter of religious life. Gallup poll a few years ago questioned 402 very elderly people. 53% said they had been very happy all their lives. 42% had been fairly happy. Only 4% said they had not been happy. And 1% said they didn't know. They probably went to them on a New Year's morning. But they had one thing in common. Few of them relied on material possessions for the joy in life they had. It was nothing they had found in the outside world. Instead, it was a secret thing, something that nobody had imposed upon them, something that they had found in an abiding faith, an inner source of strength and contentment. And 97% of those questions were affiliated with some church or synagogue. Religion is important for happiness. Probably most important, though, is the recognition of the fact that it's something that comes from the inside out. When Israel was carried captive into Babylon, they wondered how they could sing the Lord's song in a strange land, but they did sing that song. In a situation where it looked as though no joy could dwell, they sang. And some of the greatest writing of the Old Testament comes out of that era. It's a truism that the kind of pleasure we see in life depends on what we're looking for. And what we're looking for depends on what we are.